a nameless financier just purchased the soul of Hollywood, using $4 billion he never actually earned or legally possessed today. This is not a movie script, but the reality of a man who manipulated global finance while the elite clapped for him. Behind the glitz of the Oscars lay a dark secret built on the stolen wealth of an entire nation's future and hope. While the world watched the stars, a ghost was busy siphoning the lifeblood of a sovereign wealth fund into private pockets. One man managed to bypass every security protocol of the modern banking world without ever raising a single red flag or alarm. The binary chains of the SWIFT system were exploited, turning sovereign debt into a private playground for a man with no face. Gears of high finance ground against the laws of logic, moving billions through shell companies faster than any regulator could ever track. The technical loophole was simple, yet devastating, involving the layering of offshore accounts to mask the true origin of the capital. Justice was blinded by the sheer volume of wealth, as the architect bought silence and influence in the highest circles of power. He didn't just want the money. He wanted the prestige, the fame, and the immortality that only a movie star can possess. Masterpieces by Picasso and Basquiat became nothing more than tokens in a game of global money laundering and asset concealment. Millions were gambled away in a single night, a drop in the ocean for a man with an infinite supply of stolen cash. The heist was executed through a series of special-purpose vehicles, entities designed to vanish as soon as the money moved through. Every transaction was a ghost, a digital phantom that existed for only a second before being buried under layers of corporate complexity. From the top of the world, he watched his empire grow, built on a foundation of lies and the sweat of millions. The math was his weapon, using interest rates and currency swaps to create a smokescreen that baffled the world's best auditors. He was the life of the party, yet no one truly knew where the money came from, or who he really was. The yacht, worth hundreds of millions, was just another asset to be seized once the grand illusion began to finally crumble. As the investigation closed in, the evidence began to disappear into the flames of a desperate and frantic cover-up operation. The stress of the heist began to take its toll. As the architect realized that no amount of money could buy safety, he became a nomad, moving between jurisdictions that had no extradition treaties with the United States or the Malaysian government. The global manhunt was launched, but the man who stole $4 billion had already become a ghost in the machine. Every luxury was a reminder of the theft, a tangible piece of a nation's stolen future worn on a criminal's wrist. The show was over, but the audience was left wondering how such a massive crime could happen in broad daylight. In the end, the accounts were frozen and the assets were seized. But the architect himself remained one step ahead of justice. The man who bought Hollywood is still out there, a reminder that with enough money anyone can truly become invisible. This was the heist of the century, a masterclass in deception that changed the face of global finance forever. The technical foundation of this multi-billion-dollar theft began with the creation of a state-owned investment vehicle called 1MDB. By masquerading as a legitimate government initiative, the architect gained access to the global financial markets with sovereign credibility. A fake joint venture with Petro-Saudi International served as the primary conduit to move the first $1 billion offshore. Under the guise of a loan repayment, $700 million were diverted into a shell company named Good Star. The loophole was the lack of oversight in sovereign funds, allowing the architect to bypass traditional anti-money laundering protocols. Every transaction was disguised using the SWIFT network's complexity, making the illicit flow look like routine institutional banking. Goldman Sachs facilitated 3 massive bond offerings, raising $6.5 billion while earning an unprecedented 10% fee. To hide the trail, the money was layered through a labyrinth of offshore accounts in the British Virgin Islands. The architect created a fake company with a nearly identical name to a legitimate fund to deceive global auditors. Project Magnolia was the first phase, a $1.75 billion bond that disappeared into the shadow system. Singapore became a crucial hub, where BSI bank employees ignored red flags to process hundreds of millions in transfers. The accounting was a work of fiction, using revalued assets to hide the massive holes in the fund's balance sheet. Code names like 681 American Pies were used in emails to refer to the hundreds of millions being moved. Falcon Bank and Ambank served as the final gateways, funneling the stolen billions into the architect's personal accounts. Sovereign immunity acted as a shield, preventing international regulators from looking too closely at the fund's internal operations. The Tenor account was the primary vehicle used to transfer $681 million to the Premier. Every node in this global network was carefully placed to ensure that no single regulator could see the whole picture. The process of layering involved moving the money through so many accounts that the original source became impossible to trace. By the time the auditors from KPMG and Deloitte raised concerns, the money had already been moved across 3 continents. A bridge loan from Deutsche Bank provided the final injection of capital needed to keep the scheme from collapsing. The heist exploited the gaps between international jurisdictions, using the lack of cooperation between global police forces to stay ahead. This wasn't just a theft. It was a sophisticated financial operation that required the complicity of the world's most powerful banks. The technical methodology was now complete, and the stolen billions were ready to be spent on a scale never seen. With the money secured, the architect turned his attention to Hollywood, ready to buy the fame he so desperately craved. The heist was a success, but the real drama was just beginning, as the stolen wealth entered the world of celebrity. The key to the entire operation was the ability to remain invisible while moving billions across the global financial system. Phase 2 was over. The money was gone, and the world was about to witness the most expensive party in history. The stolen billions were now being laundered through the glitz of Hollywood, transforming illicit wealth into cinematic prestige and cultural influence. Red Granite Pictures was established with a massive influx of capital, funding Martin Scorsese's masterpiece using the diverted funds from the Malaysian people. The architect gifted Leonardo DiCaprio a $13 million Basquiat painting, a gesture of friendship paid for by the unsuspecting citizens of Malaysia. Over $8 million in jewelry was purchased for supermodel Miranda Kerr, including a massive heart-shaped diamond that symbolized the height of excess. Las Vegas became the architect's personal playground, where he spent millions on champagne and high-stakes gambling to maintain his image as a billionaire. The technical loophole allowed him to move money through casinos, effectively cleaning the funds while losing millions in a carefully orchestrated display. By classifying these personal extravagances as business investments, the architect exploited accounting standards to justify the outflow of capital from the 1MDB fund. Swizz Beatz and Alicia Keys were brought into the inner circle, receiving millions for performances and collaborations funded by the massive global heist. A rare white Ferrari was gifted to Kim Kardashian as a wedding present, further embedding the architect into the fabric of global celebrity culture. At a single party in Saint-Tropez, the architect spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on champagne, outshining the world's most famous and wealthy heirs. Art became a portable store of value, allowing the architect to move millions across borders without triggering the traditional banking system's red flag alerts. The Equanimity yacht featured a Turkish bath and a helicopter pad, a floating palace that cost $250 million to build. Private jet travel allowed the architect to move his inner circle across the globe in total secrecy, bypassing the scrutiny of commercial airline manifests. The math of the high life required a constant influx of new capital, forcing the architect to launch even more ambitious bond offerings globally. Shopping sprees at Harrods and Bergdorf Goodman were routine, with the architect spending millions on bespoke suits and high-end fashion to maintain his disguise. The architect became the ultimate phantom of Hollywood, a man who everyone knew, but whose true source of wealth remained a total mystery to all. From London to Los Angeles, the stolen money was woven into the global economy, making it nearly impossible for investigators to untangle the complex web. As the years passed, the scale of the spending increased, reaching a point where the stolen billions were now fueling entire sectors of luxury. He bought his way into the most exclusive circles on the planet, using the Malaysian people's money to purchase the friendship of the powerful. The technical maneuver involved charging exorbitant management fees on the 1MDB funds, which were then diverted directly into the architect's private offshore bank accounts. Even the most mundane aspects of his life were touched by the theft, with hundreds of thousands spent on wellness and personal grooming services. His name was never on the credits, but his influence was everywhere. A silent partner in the most successful films of the decade in Hollywood. The acquisition of the Park Lane Hotel for $600 million was a bold move, cementing his status as a major real estate mogul. Every luxury apartment and high-end estate was a brick in the wall he built to hide the true scale of the massive financial crime. The films were successful, but the cost of production was secondary to the need to move large sums of money through the entertainment industry. The high life was a facade, a brilliant and expensive distraction designed to keep the world from looking too closely at the empty Malaysian treasury. The escalation of the high life had reached its peak, and the first cracks in the architect's carefully constructed empire were finally starting to appear. The Department of Justice finally opened the vault on the most ambitious financial fraud ever recorded in modern history. Swiss authorities discovered a digital trail leading from a national development fund directly into the pockets of global power players. A brave whistleblower leaked 20,000 emails, exposing the internal mechanics of the heist that crippled a nation's economy. Claire Rue Castle Brown began connecting the dots, revealing that the billion-dollar joint venture was actually a sophisticated personal scam. The legal machinery of the United States began to turn, targeting the billions of dollars laundered through American banks. Signals intelligence captured the frantic communications of the architect's inner circle as the global investigation began to intensify. The technical breakthrough came when investigators proved the shell companies were controlled by a single individual, not a state. Secret meetings in London provided the missing links as bankers began to flip and share their hidden records. Jho Low was finally identified as the central figure, the mastermind who orchestrated the entire $4 billion theft. Interpol issued a global red notice, turning the architect's world into a cage of high-tech surveillance and constant fear. Singaporean regulators moved with clinical precision, shutting down banks that failed to stop the flow of illicit wealth. Panicked bankers tried to destroy the evidence, but the paper trail was already too long to be erased completely. The FBI's surveillance teams tracked his every move, documenting the meetings that would prove his role in the conspiracy. The legal battle for the stolen billions began as the government moved to seize properties from Beverly Hills to London. The architect's political protectors realized the game was changing as the international pressure became impossible to ignore. The $250 million yacht became a floating fortress, constantly moving to evade the reaching hands of justice. Every attempt to erase the digital evidence failed as investigators had already secured the master servers in secret raids. The United States declared a war on global corruption, promising to return every stolen dollar to the people of Malaysia. Physical assets worth hundreds of millions were seized, from luxury penthouses to diamond jewelry and rare works of art. The man who once bought Hollywood was now watching his legacy burn in the cold light of a television screen. The investigation reached the heart of the movie industry, identifying the hundreds of millions that funded Oscar-winning films. The architect's escape routes were being cut off one by one as international warrants were finally enforced. The final digital barrier was breached, revealing the true ownership of the offshore accounts and the destination of the money. The legal teams realized the evidence was overwhelming, and the architect's web of lies was finally coming apart. The architect became a ghost once more, fleeing into the shadows of the East to avoid the reaching hand of justice. The hunt continued across the globe as the world's most wanted financier sought refuge in the last remaining shadows. The net was closed, and the man who bought Hollywood was now a prisoner of his own stolen wealth. The convict sat in a cold, concrete room as the heavy iron door locked him away from his former world of luxury. A massive wooden gavel struck the bench with a sound like a thunderclap, sealing a 12-year sentence for the disgraced leader. Restitution began as the Department of Justice channeled billions back to the Malaysian people, repairing the damage of the massive heist. In a Manhattan boardroom, the global banking giant Goldman Sachs agreed to pay nearly $3 billion in criminal penalties and fines. The national debt of Malaysia became a staggering monument to the theft, requiring decades of fiscal reform to truly resolve. The $250 million yacht was sold at a massive discount, with the proceeds finally returning to the state. Every detail of the fraud was etched into the permanent digital record, ensuring the world would never forget the architect's crimes. The political dynasty that once ruled with absolute authority collapsed under the weight of its own greed and corruption. Public trust in financial institutions died a quiet death as the scale of the global complicity became widely known. The technical breakthrough came when forensic auditors traced the movement of funds through 4 continents and dozens of banks. The physical remnants of the stolen life were dismantled piece by piece as the legal system reclaimed the wealth. A new era of transparency began as the global community moved to burn down the web of offshore secrecy. The new government promised a total cleanup of the system, vowing that such a theft would never happen again. For the whistleblowers who risked everything, the convictions were a quiet victory after years of living in fear. Hollywood attempted to distance itself from the scandal, scrubbing the architect's influence from the credits of major films. Intelligence reports suggested the architect was hiding in a coastal city, protected by a web of political interests and secret agreements. The scales of justice were finally balanced, but the cost to the people of Malaysia remained a heavy burden. The 1MDB scandal became a mandatory case study for future regulators, a warning of how easily the system can be exploited. The physical removal of the stolen life was complete, leaving only empty rooms and the echoes of a fraudulent empire. The Department of Justice filed its final reports, marking the end of the most complex kleptocracy investigation in history. The long road to full recovery would take decades, as the stolen billions were slowly clawed back from across the globe. Despite the global effort, a significant portion of the stolen funds remained lost in the digital void, perhaps forever. Whispers of the architect's presence in Macau continued to surface, a reminder that the man who bought Hollywood was still free. The chapter of the greatest heist in history was closing, but the lessons learned would resonate for generations to come. In the aftermath, only the cold clarity of the truth remained, stripped of the glitz and glamour of the stolen billions. The final settlement amounts were scrolled across the world's screens, marking the end of a multi-year legal battle. A new day dawned for a nation that had been betrayed, with hope for a future built on integrity and justice. The legacy of the man who bought Hollywood faded into history, leaving behind only the ghost of a billion-dollar dream. As the screen fades to black, a single glowing dot remains, representing the billions that may never be recovered from the void. The story of 1MDB is over, but the door to global corruption remains unlocked, waiting for the next architect to arrive.